And thank you all so much for joining us. Best-selling author Tess Gerritsen will discuss her new thriller, The Summer Guests, in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. International best-selling author Tess Gerritsen took an unusual route to a writing career. A graduate of Stanford University, she later earned her MD at the University of California at San Francisco. While on maternity leave as a physician, she began to write fiction, publishing her first novel in 1987. She has since sold over 40 million books in 40 countries, winning both the Nero and RITA Awards. Tess's novels have been major bestsellers around the world. Publishers Weekly dubbed her the medical suspense queen. Her series featuring homicide detective Jane Rizzoli and medical examiner Maura Isles inspired the TNT series Rizzoli Isles. And now retired from medicine, Tess lives in Maine, where she writes full-time. So folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Tess for joining us here tonight. Tess, thanks so much for being with us.
Yes, and thank you. I did see somebody from South Bristol, Maine. So hello, there is a Mainer here.
All right, Maine is represented in the chat. Excellent. So Tess, let's get right into it. Can you give us a brief synopsis, just a brief overview? We're trapped in an elevator for 30 seconds. What would you tell us about The Summer Guests? What is the book about?
It's about a group of retired spies who live in this little town, very much like I am living right now. And when a 14-year-old girl disappears, this group of ex-spies decides to help the police, whether they want them or not. So it's a murder mystery, but it's also based on the Martini Club, which I introduced in the Spy Coast.
Right. And so let's also take a step back and talk about the Martini Club. Now, this is book 2 in the series. Can you tell us a little bit about book 1 and the series in general?
Yeah, it was inspired by something about my own hometown. Here I live in Maine, and I discovered 35 years ago when I moved here that I was surrounded by retired CIA people. It was something that we found out, incidentally, because my husband's a medical doctor and he was accepting new patients, and he would take these occupational histories. And they would say, these new patients, I used to work for the government, but I can't tell you what I did. And after a couple times, he thought, who are these people? Our real estate agent told us, oh, they're all retired from the CIA. And that was my first introduction to this very odd little place I live in. It turns out there were 2 spies on the street where we lived. I had a neighbor on one side who was retired OSS, and up the street on the other side was retired CIA. So I began to think about my neighbors in a different way. I would see them in the grocery store or the post office, and I thought, what kind of a life did you used to have? What was your career like before you moved here and retired? And as I got older, I became more interested in retirees. So many of us, as we get older and we get gray hair, nobody cares what we do anymore. And I thought, there's a lot of rich history among these gray-haired people in my town, but they can't talk about it. So I'm going to imagine what their lives were like in the CIA or abroad. And what is it like now to be retired from a really interesting job like that? Do they have book clubs? Do they have cocktail parties? Well, that's where the Martini Club came around. It's 5 retired spies. They live in a town called Purity, Maine. They do get together for book groups, and they do drink a lot, because I think spies do drink a lot. And every so often they get involved in some daring do because it sort of falls on their lap, or they're pulled back into their old lives through various circumstances. So that's the background of the Martini Club, and that's where I started with the Spy Coast, which it looks at one of the women in particular, Maggie Bird. She is now a chicken farmer living in Purity, and her past comes back to haunt her in the form of a dead body dumped in her driveway. When her friends get together and try and help her, they run up against a local police chief named Joe Thibodeau. She's a good Maine girl who really hasn't traveled outside of her own state. And so a lot of the fun of this series is watching the conflict between our local girl who doesn't even know who these people are, and our 5 very sophisticated older spies who know a lot but can't really talk about it. So that was the background for the Martini Club.
Yeah, really enjoyed both books. I just can't say enough, and I have to navigate around spoilers. But what do you want the? Well, first of all, just maybe I missed it in your response, but why did so many spies and CIA operatives and similar occupations? Why did those folks retire to Maine? Why Maine of all places?
That is a really good question, and I've gotten several answers from people I've spoken to. One is that this is far from any nuclear targets. Another is that yeah, that this used to be a place for safe houses. That when you needed to disappear somebody, you'd send them up to Maine for a while, where they'd be safe. One big thing I think is that Yankees in general, Mainers in particular, are very respectful of privacy. If they sense that you do not want to talk about who you are, where you came from, they will back off. They allow us to keep our own private lives. And finally, there was a journalist from Yankee Magazine who came up here looking for that very question. Who are the spies of Camden, Maine? He couldn't get anybody to talk to him, but he did learn a couple things that made him think. One of the reasons is that the first group of CIA people were really from a lot of Ivy League schools, a lot of wealthy backgrounds coming from Massachusetts, and maybe in their childhoods they grew up sailing on Penobscot Bay. They have very fond memories of Maine, so they eventually moved here for their retirements. But I think there are a number of reasons. Also, you know what? We had a little branch of MK Ultra operating here in coastal Maine. I can talk about that later because that comes into the summer guests. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for spies to have been familiar with this area.
All right, so getting back to the summer guests, which was just released a couple of weeks ago in mid-March. So I just finished it last night or yesterday afternoon, so it's really fresh in my head. What do you want readers to know about so this is interesting. I'm going into this, and I actually felt that the main character of the book was more so Joe than it was the spies, than it was Maggie. And obviously, the book was told from multiple points of view. Who is the main character in this book?
The main character is actually the town. That's why
Very
I
good
always
answer. You tricked me, Tess.
It's the town. You know, every book I feel like has to be focused on a different person. I want to give you this whole idea of who this community is. And the first book, The Spy Coast, was really very much about Maggie and
Right.
her past and why she left the CIA and really why she has decided to hide herself away. This second book, I wanted to focus on the community they live in, this wonderful town in Maine, and why they would get involved in a local mystery. So yes, you're right. Joe is much more important in this second book. And the third book I'm writing right now is really focused on Ingrid. So it's to give you an idea of how these people have bonded and how they are continuing to bond as the series goes on.
So, do we want to talk a bit about the wealthy family who's at the center of this book? Who are some of the characters we should be aware of?
Okay, so Maine, anybody who lives in a resort town probably has some familiarity with this situation, which is that in the summertime, very wealthy people come to Maine to spend the summer. And they are so wealthy, they have these giant homes on islands or around lakefronts that are empty 8 months out of the year. They call them cottages, but really they're mansions. So it sets up a certain amount of friction because here are these wealthy people coming into Maine, which is, you know, a large part of it is very poor state. So you have this conflict between the haves and the have-nots. You have the conflict also between people who are not from here, they're from away, and the local people who've been here for generations, like Joe Thibodeau. So you're going to find conflict between these groups, and I want to explore that as well, people from away and people who live here. And what happens with this family, the Conover family, is that they are very wealthy. They come, they spend every summer, they've been doing this for decades, and this time they have brought a a new group of people in their family. They brought a new daughter-in-law and her child from a previous marriage. So it's Susan and her daughter Zoe. They don't feel particularly comfortable in this family because they come from more modest circumstances, but Susan is married in to the family. And for the first time, she's come to this lake house. And, you know, she doesn't feel like she fits in, and they don't quite accept her because she's like an implant to the family. Then her daughter Zoe disappears one day. Um, Nobody knows where she is. And here's where the conflict is for Susan. She knows there's something wrong. She knows that her daughter would not do this, but nobody in the family is really getting worried, and this irritates her. They're all saying, "Oh, it's Maine. Everybody, all these kids run around. If she's found a girlfriend, don't worry about it." But it gets later and later. She doesn't show up for dinner. It gets to be 10 o'clock at night, and Susan can't deal with this anymore. She just calls the police. And this introduces Joe Thibodeau into the story for a missing girl, a missing 14-year-old girl. And it gets, it gets more involved than that because they think maybe she drowned. So they drag the pond, and instead of finding a 14-year-old girl, they find the bones of a woman who's been there for maybe 50 years and was clearly murdered. So now we have two mysteries that Joe has to solve: missing 14-year-old girl and a long dead homicide case.
Something that was interesting is that Susan's husband, Zoe's father, was that Ethan? I mixed up the character's
Ethan,
name.
yes.
Ethan. So Ethan is a writer, and they live in Boston, and so they're vacationing kind of reluctantly. He didn't want to go back to the house either. They're up in Maine, and he seems to be suffering from a writer's block, and he makes a joke. He had a successful debut novel 5 years ago, and he hasn't been able to follow up on it. And he said something to the effect of, or it might have even been his wife. Somebody said something to the effect of, it's so much harder writing that second novel than it is the first. And this so happens to be the second novel in this series. So I wasn't sure if you were maybe poking fun at yourself there, Tess. And I guess you had also mentioned before we went live is that this was the first time you've ever written about another writer. So
Yeah.
I wanted to maybe talk about that character a bit.
Yeah, I don't know why I've never written about a writer, because maybe I think that writers are in real life are really boring. What are we doing? We're just sitting here imagining stuff, but I remember my second book. It was really hard to write because you've spent like maybe 2 years, 3 years writing this first book, and all of a sudden you've got to turn out a second one, and there are expectations, and this is when writer's block really hits. So poor Ethan is having this problem. Um, the other reason that I think it's interesting he's a writer is that we writers, we're so wrapped up in this imaginary world, we don't really pay attention to the real world sometimes. We don't pay attention to what our husband is saying or what our kids are asking us. And that's true for Ethan. He is so wrapped up in this new story that that's bloomed in his head. He doesn't pay attention to his stepdaughter. And when she disappears, he feels guilty because, yeah, that's what happens if you don't pay attention to your kids. Something happens, and here you are, dealing with imaginary people. So it adds to I guess, the torment of poor Ethan that he feels responsible for his daughter going missing.
And she had befriended a girl earlier in the day whom was a complete stranger, and she loved to swim. They talked about how there's a lot of dead zones in Maine where like you don't get cell phone reception. Is that
Yes.
true, Tess? Oh my goodness,
Yes.
couldn't,
Yes.
couldn't, couldn't live without my phone, Tess.
There are many places where you're talking on the phone, all of a sudden, whoever is on your phone has just disappeared because we do have dead zones. But the other thing about Maine is that when she meets another girl and they bond, it's very common here. Kids find each other. They meet each other in the pond. They meet in the skateboard park, or they meet at the beach, and they make friends very 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 quickly. And there's summer camps. This is the land of summer camps where people from New York send their kids to spend the summer at these wonderful,
Yeah.
woodlands. And so when this girl Zoe meets another girl and runs off to go visit her farm, it's not surprising. It's not unsafe. I think in many ways, it's still very innocent up here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to see a cow too. So, and then they were able to track down that girl, and talk to her, I guess, grandfather, I couldn't hear her uncle, grandfather, whatever, and that leads us to our first suspect. And you threw like a half dozen suspects at us, Tess. That was you had me guessing until the end there, really. So, but we won't talk too much about that. Let's see here. So the other wealthy family member. So obviously he has a brother whom he sort of doesn't get along with or didn't get along with anyway in his childhood. The brother kind of bullied him, and there was a sibling rivalry where the brother was kind of better at everything than he was. But he has since married, and they have a child who has, I didn't quite understand, but some sort of disability of some sort. But the character I really want to talk about is the mother. So they're all back in Maine at the house because so Ethan's father had passed away, and so the mother, who's now widowed. But boy, that mother at times was ice cold. What should we know about the matriarch of the family?
She's a very powerful woman with a past. And you'll find out about her past as time goes by. But let's just say the CIA is in this town. The CIA has been there for 50 years, just as in real life. Yeah, she's a powerful woman, and she rules her household, and she's kind of a scary character. And that's why Joe Thibodeau, who's the cop, has to tiptoe around this family because they are very well to do. And the family dynamics were fascinating to me. I mean, families are complicated. Every family is complicated. This one has, of course, its own complications because you have siblings who have never gotten along, who've always been rivals. Then you have the friends around the lake, and then you have this missing girl. So I'm just sort of throwing this crisis into a family that's already in crisis.
And you have a mysterious figure who lives across the lake, whose family has a bad reputation for something the father did many years ago. Yes, there are lots of
There are grudges. Yes,
yes,
there are grudges in this town, and you're going to
yes,
find out. But really the focus is still on my lovely Martini Club members.
yes. Yeah. So can we talk about well, let's talk more about them. So there's five of them. Although I do think that in this particular book, as you said, the real focus was on Maggie. And can we talk about Maggie's love interest? I felt that was I like that relationship quite a bit.
Yeah, well, in the Spy Coast, we find out about Maggie's marriage before she moved to Maine. Um, and how it ended. What was it that drove her from the CIA into retirement? What was it that made her just to say, I'm getting out of the world. I'm gonna, just go to this little town in Maine and forget about my life before. It was a very tragic beginning. So now she's in her 60s. She's a widow, and she's still haunted by what happened overseas when she was working for the agency. But it turns out that one of the members of the Martini Club, they met years before, 40 years before, at the farm when they were CIA recruits. So they've managed to maintain this bond all these decades later, even though they were assigned to different parts of the world. It turns out that one of the men that she met way back then, 40 years, has always held a torch for her. He's always kind of loved her from afar, but then she got married, and so he didn't say anything. And now they're all back together. She's a widow, and that spark is still there. It's really funny because you're a young guy, but as I get older, I start to see men in their 60s as the reach of the peak of their sexuality. I just think that men who are 60 to 70 are just really attractive. And so I can imagine this romance blooming even 40 years later that Maggie is now once again realizing that this guy Declan, he's a pretty hot guy, and he's always loved her. So that little romance is starting to finally take shape after all these years.
Yeah, there was even a line in the book, I think, some along those lines. But I liked their dynamic for sure. We do have an audience question that I probably should ask now before we keep
Oh,
going. So an anonymous attendee wants to know: should they read The Spy Coast before they read the summer guests?
I
Let
would,
me. Can I answer that too?
yeah.
I would recommend that. I did read The Spy Coast like 2 years ago when it first came out, and you'll notice I'm not asking too many questions about it because it was 2 years ago and I have a bad memory. But yes, things were coming back to me as I was reading the second book. Tess, what would you say Oh, I'm sorry. I got you while you were drinking.
I
Sorry.
would yeah, if you have both books, I would say read The Spy Coast first. You
Yeah.
can read The Summer Guest as a standalone, but you won't quite understand the backgrounds of these characters and how they came to be and how they came to be so bonded.
Yeah.
Um,
Like in
and
addition,
all,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Spy Coast is a much more international story because we follow Maggie's career in Istanbul and in Thailand and Italy and London. So the second book it just feels more like a closed domestic situation instead. I think they're very different books, even though they have the same characters.
I was going to say that, Tess. They are very different books. And in addition to the Martini Club, we meet Joe, obviously, in the first book. We meet, I'm forgetting his name, I think it begins with an R, but one of the first suspects in this book was
Luther,
Beth.
her
Luther, is it?
neighbor.
Yeah,
Her Luther is her next
Luther.
door.
Luther, that's who it is. I mean, yes. Yes. Anyway, okay. I don't want to. I don't want to give away any spoilers. Okay. So Tess, and actually, a follow up question: how many books are planned for the Martini Club series?
I don't know. I mean, I've pretty much finished the third book. Um, Part of the reason I might consider keeping on is that Amazon Studios is developing it for a television show. So, I feel like, you know what, they're going to want more stories. And the plan was that it would be 1 year per book, so that the first season would play out the Spy Coast. So I mean, there are other reasons to continue writing them, but the main reason I turned this into a series is that I love these characters. I love all five of them. I feel as if I want to be with them when they have their cocktail parties, when they're sitting together with their book groups and talking about groups and drinking martinis. They become almost a second family to me. I love hearing what they're going to say.
I think Angie Harmon and Sasha Alexander are probably too young still for the Martini Club.
Yes.
But maybe you can bring back Lorraine Bracco. I'm just throwing that out there. But anyway, that's really exciting that it could be a TV series. Really enjoyed Rizzoli Isles, one of the few shows on TNT I think I've ever watched. I don't really watch that channel. All right. Let's see here. So many questions to ask, and I've only got you for 15 more minutes, and then we'll go to the audience. Can
Okay.
we? Yeah. So can we actually get to and again, we'll go as far as you want to go in terms of spoilers. But did you want to talk a bit about some of the plot as it relates to the CIA
Yeah.
testing drugs on people both domestically and abroad during the Cold War? And what do you want to say about that, Tess? I don't want to say too much, but
Well,
what do you want to say?
this was actually the inspiration for the summer guest. I was having dinner with the adult daughter of a CIA person who has since passed away, and she said that their family moved to Maine because her father was involved with the CIA program called MK Ultra. And once I got started researching that, it was like down the rabbit hole I went. It was so fascinating. For those of you who are not familiar with MK Ultra, it was a program that was started in 1953 by the CIA. It was pretty much they were looking into ways for mind control, using drugs, electroshock therapy, magic mushrooms, hypnosis, anything they could do to try and manipulate the human brain so that maybe they would be able to interrogate you and get secrets out of you. Or also another aspect of it was to improve your ability for extrasensory perception. Apparently, they believed in that stuff back then. One of the reasons they were pursuing this was that they knew the Russians were doing it. So the Russians had their own version of MK Ultra, and we did not want to be left behind. So the program had like 150 sub-programs under this umbrella of MK Ultra, and when you look back at these studies, you have to laugh. Some of them were absolutely absurd. The CIA was operating a whorehouse in San Francisco, and they were engaging the prostitutes there to help them with their studies. The prostitutes would give their Johns drugs, and the CIA would be back there with their one-way mirror taking notes, it was called Project Midnight Climax. So that was one of the little things that was happening. But there was also a branch of it in Maine. And I can tell you which house it was happening in because that house is still there. I believe that in Maine it was mostly magic mushrooms and maybe hypnosis. But when I found that out, I thought, wow, they were active. There was an actual, yeah, something that was happening here. Now, it turned into something of a scandal because there was at least one death. One CIA officer did not feel this was an ethical study, so he complained. He was given LSD by one of his colleagues, and he had a psychotic break and jumped out of an 11th floor window and died. So we know there was at least one death. It went to congressional hearings, and as a result, the head of the CIA ordered all the records destroyed of MK Ultra. I think there were like 6 boxes left. So that was a scandal in itself that they tried to cover up everything. Now, why did they cover it up? Maybe they were covering up things that they were ashamed of or they were afraid would get them into trouble. But as a novelist, when you hear that all the records were destroyed, it opens up a door because now you can make up anything and there's no way for anybody to contradict you. I mean, the reality itself is already kind of absurd and wild. But that was what started me writing The Summer Guest was I wanted to explore this history of MK Ultra in Maine.
Really, really fascinating stuff. Really fascinating stuff. And it does tie into the plot, folks. We're not just talking about this for no reason, but we won't
Right.
go too much further into that there. I really liked how you had two mysteries and really mysteries within mysteries going, and they all sort of connect in the end there. Really liked the characters, particularly Joe and Maggie, and their relationship, by the way. Their dynamic was really interesting as well. Maggie was quite frustrated that it seemed like the Martini Club was always a few steps ahead of her. Obviously, they have resources and knowledge that she doesn't, but that really made the book for me.
Well, you know
Tess, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say what I think the real theme of the book is that um, young people don't appreciate the wisdom of old people.
Mhm.
And this is the conflict that I keep, returning to in these books is that Joe Thibodeau, who's a young woman, doesn't appreciate at first that these people in their 60s and 70s are not over the hill yet. They have a lot to contribute. They have a lot of skills. They have a lot of knowledge and really just plain old wisdom. And I feel that that's the major theme is that this ability to reach across a generation and realize that together you can do things that either one of your groups could not do. I wrote this book called Gravity years ago about the space program, and one of the people I interviewed was an engineer who worked on the Apollo system. I mean, we're talking, way back, the moonshot. And when he retired, he said, none of us wrote a lot of this stuff down. There's no record of it. So these young engineers, these young astrophysicists and rocket scientists are coming in and they're making the same mistakes we did. They don't bother to ask us what worked and what didn't. And I feel as if that gets repeated with every generation.
So, Tess, I do want to take a step back and ask some more broad questions about your career and your writing process. I want to get those in before we go to the audience. When I introduced you, I talked a bit about your background, but could you give us your writing origin story? How did you become a writer?
Oh, I was 7 years old and I told my dad I wanted to write books like Nancy Drew, and he said, "There's no money to be made. You can't make a living at that." So I went to medical school instead. I mean, I like science and I was very interested in medicine and came out with a medical degree and I became a specialist in internal medicine. But I always knew I was going to be a writer. I thought it might be just a hobby, something I would do in my spare time. But when went on maternity leave and my kids were sleeping all the time, great kids, great sleepers. That's when I wrote my first book. And by the third novel, I was actually able to sell one. And I started off in romance because that's what I was reading a lot of. There is no easy genre. I've discovered this. Romance is hard, mystery is hard, they're all hard. And then over the course of nearly 40 years as a writer, I've written medical thrillers, crime novels, two historicals, a science fiction novel, and even a really sexy ghost story. So, I just, and now I'm writing spy novels. I think it's the way to keep a career going as a writer is to never let yourself get bored and to always look at for a challenge and just really enjoy the challenge of doing something that you really want to do.
And it sounds like you'll have to continue the Martini Club for the TV project. But are there any other genres that you haven't written in that maybe you'll write in the future?
No, I think I've written the ones I want to. I mean, I would like to go back to writing historical novels, but I just don't think that's what my publisher wants from me right now. And right now, because I'm enjoying writing about retired people and an older group of people who are using their skills and still ready for adventures, I'm going to stick with these five for a while.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, you're so much more than Rizzoli and Isles, but I'm sure you get this question a lot. Are we absolutely done with the Rizzoli and Isles series? We're never going to see them again?
I don't know. I
Huh?
don't know. I mean, Jane and Maura are still alive. I didn't kill off anybody vital, and I might go back to them, um, but I'm you know what? I'm kind of in love with my five people here, so I
Sure. No,
want to stick
absolutely.
with them.
Maybe we could have some sort of crossover. No, 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 no. So, what advice would you give to aspiring writers, Tess?
My advice is to pay attention to the voice of your characters, and this is something I think I've learned late in my career, something that I'm much more attentive to, which is when I write a novel, what's exciting for me is not action. It's not gunplay. It's not car chases. It is the emotional life of who you're writing about. So when I start off with a book, I feel like I want to identify what the core emotion is of that story. For The Spy Coast, it was about regret. It was about things that Maggie had done that she regrets and she's still haunted by. And the book I'm writing now with Ingrid, it's about longing. It's about an old an old lover who comes back into her life, and Ingrid's married. So, and he's trying to lure her back into work in the spy field, and so she has this choice to make. Do I jump back into action and leave my husband behind? So it's really looking for the human conflicts as opposed to. I mean, plot's important and it's interesting, but I think we really read for character.
So, by the way, some of the characters were open about their pasts, but the Martini Club, my underst from what I gathered, and like sort of the closing chapters, that they were trying to keep their previous occupations secret, but people who probably shouldn't have known knew. In real life, how does that work? Have you, it seems like when you encounter people in Maine, you knew that, your neighbor used to do that and the other neighbor used to do this. So how does that work? Do some people choose to be open with their previous occupation and others choose not to?
It depends on the level of secrecy that they have
Sure.
retired with. I mean, there are some people here who will take their secrets to the grave. They will not even reveal that they worked for CIA. And there are others who are analysts who are free to talk about the fact that they worked for the CIA. Lately, when I've been touring in Maine, I've actually been asking the question of my audience, how many of you are willing to admit you work for Central Intelligence? And every so often, a hand or two will pop up. Um, then there are people who, they will admit that they worked for the agency, but they just can't tell you what they did. And it's something, it's a vow they take, and they're very strict about that. I can find information sometimes from their children or from their neighbors or from associates who say, "Oh, you know who he worked for." The director of our library here, um, was a CIA agent, and she and her husband were CIA. We had a bed and breakfast here which was who was it was run by a retired CIA. We had a restaurant here. Um, for a little town that keeps its secrets, we're pretty good at knowing what the secrets are. So it's like I say, the worst kept secret in Maine. That yeah, we have them here.
By the way, there is no Purity, Maine, right? So what is Purity, Maine? What city is that supposed to? What town is that supposed to be?
Well, it reflects my town of Camden, Maine, which is
Camden, Maine.
Camden. It's geographically, when I describe purity, it's very close to my own hometown. It's a town where it's on the coast, but it also goes inland, so it has lakes, it has mountains. It's a really, really beautiful town. We have a lot of tourists here, probably swells to 4 times our population every summer.
Tess, can you talk a bit about your writing process? Are you a planner or are you a pantser? And sort of what is a day in the life of Tess when she's writing a novel?
I'm a pantser. I wish I could be a planner because it seems
Or
like that would
plotter,
be
I guess is the right word.
yeah, a plotter. It would be so much more logical to do it that way. But every time I've tried to write an outline, it never worked out. I always ended up veering off in some other story. So, I am really inspired, pretty much as I mentioned, by this opening emotion of what is your character feeling, and if I can hear that character talk to me, that's even better. For instance, the Spy Coast opened up when I heard Maggie Bird's voice in my head. She said, "I'm not the woman I used to be." And when you can hear a character's voice, you know so much about them already. You know if they're male or female, you know their age, you know their educational background because of the vocabulary they use, and you hear the emotion in their voice. And when I heard Maggie talk to me, I heard regret. And I said, "Maggie, what woman did you used to be? Tell me your story." And that often just launches it right there. I let my character start to reveal herself.
Mhm.
Um, I never know what's going to happen. And with Maggie, I just knew that something sad had happened and that she had been driven from the agency for very personal reasons. So I get going. I let the character start, and I'm surprised every step of the way.
And how long does it take you to complete a project? How much time do you spend researching, and how long is that writing process?
Every book is a little different. It generally takes me about a year,
Yeah.
and the research process depends on the book. Now, for the Spy Coast in particular, I had to do a lot of research because I'm not a spy, or if I were, I wouldn't tell you.
That's right.
Right? So I started off by reading a lot of memoirs. You know, CIA, these people, they can't talk about what they did, but they sure seem to write a lot of memoirs. And I was trying to find, I guess, the emotional aspects of what it is to work in intelligence. Tradecraft is interesting, all the little tricks, the dead drops, all that stuff. But what I really wanted to know is what is it like to live a life where you cannot tell the truth? What does it do to your relationships? What is it like to, every time you make a friend, you're not really sure that they aren't there for secondary gain? It has got to be very tiring for a person. And that was what I was looking at, was the emotional strain of working in intelligence. Of course, the tradecraft stuff, as I mentioned, is interesting. So I had to do research on that. And I was doing a lot of research also on our relationships with Russia. And right now, as I'm finishing up my third book, the Shadow Friends, I'm revising things left and right because of current events.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's like all of a sudden, oh my God, the CIA is now saying Russia is our buddy, and they're not quite ready to make that transition, and they're like, what do we do now? And then, very good new recruits are being kicked to the curb. So I'm trying to incorporate that into the new story as well.
Yeah. Something I should have mentioned at the beginning is so Summer Guests has received rave reviews, got a starred review in Kirkus Reviews, is ending up on a lot of these quarterly or monthly, best of lists. So folks, definitely, if you aren't going to buy it, and I recommend you buy it, then certainly go out and borrow it from your local library. Tess, you have written in a lot of genres, but now you're currently in thrillers. What do you read other thriller writers? Who are you reading right now? Do you have a book or two you would recommend to the audience?
Oh, well, lately I have to admit I'm reading a lot of nonfiction because I'm doing so much research on spies and on politics. And but in terms of a really fun novel that your readers might be interested in is oh, I have it right here because I've been pushing this book. You Are Fatally Invited. And it's a fun novel about a bunch of thriller writers who
Oh,
are invited to a house in Maine. And of course, one by one they get killed. It's kind of like, Agatha Christie, and except that this time the victims are writers like me.
Oh, there you go. All right, so now we're going to transition to audience questions and comments. So, folks, if you have a question, please get it into the Q&A. If you have a comment, please get it into the chat. Ellen asks, are you ever surprised on what your character is telling you?
Oh, all the time. I just, for instance, with Spy Coast, I did not know what happened to Maggie's husband. And it was not until maybe a chapter before it finally got resolved that I knew what happened to Danny. And when it happened, well, I might as well tell you, I started crying. So those kinds of things, when you feel those emotions that deeply, it's like gold for a writer. It also can be really kind of upsetting because the character you loved maybe didn't turn out the way you thought he would. So I'm often surprised, yeah. And that's why I don't outline. I think when I'm surprised, my readers are surprised as well.
Stephanie writes, I love older, vibrant female main characters. Do you find such characters easier or harder to write than younger ones?
I find them easier to write because that's who I am right now. I'm an old lady, and I think as I get older and I look around at all these very accomplished women in their 60s and 70s, and some of them spies, some of them doctors, I think, we're not done yet. We have a lot left to give. We have a lot of adventures left in us, and I love writing about this age group. I think what I really love is we don't worry about the things that young people worry about. Before, when you're young, it's like, am I ever going to fall in love? Am I ever going to have kids? Am I going to get married? And now, in your 60s and 70s, you go, oh, to hell with that. I'm going to worry about, what I want this time in life. Although, you know what? I also have to admit that there is no end to romance. As I mentioned, I think some of the most attractive men I know now are in their 60s, and maybe that's a function of my age, or maybe it's just that I've come to appreciate the experience that they have.
So I guess I'll ask this question. Susan asks, did you come across a connection between MK Ultra and Charles Manson in your research?
Charles Manson. No, I didn't. I'm curious about that question. I wonder whether she has some kind of information that Manson may have been given drugs. I mean, apparently there were a lot of people who were using MK Ultra as a source of drugs.
By the way, I mentioned how well received the book is. Judith notes that I just want Tess to know that as of last week, I was number 122 on the wait list for the summer guests at my library. So, a
Oh,
very
well,
popular book, Tess.
thank you. Tell your library to get a few more copies.
That's right. That's right. Um, let's see. Amanda asks, how much of your medical training plays into your writing? We did see a couple of medical examiner scenes, I think, in the summer guests.
Yes,
Uh,
and Spy Coast especially because
yes,
Danny, her husband, was a doctor.
yes.
And so there was a lot of medicine there. This book has a little less. There's a little bit because they're looking at the skeletal remains,
Right.
and they had to decide whether the woman was killed or not. And also, every time I do a book, there's always research involved. In this particular book, Summer Guests, I was fascinated by the research into dental amalgams. What can you tell about the age of a person based on what kind of fillings the dentist used, because it's been changing over the decades. So there's some research there. But in the past, especially with Rizzoli and Isles, I was using my medical background all the time since Maura Isles is a doctor.
Let's see. Anonymous attendee. I read Playing with Fire and then discovered that Tess composed the theme music for Incendio. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Has Tess composed other violin solos or other pieces?
Yes, but mostly fiddle music. Because I live in Maine and we have a huge population of Irish Americans here, there are quite a few places where you can just, go and have a jam session. So I really got into the Irish music scene and the Scottish music scene. And after you've played a lot of fiddle tunes, you start to want to make up your own. So yes, I have done some of that. That book, Playing with Fire, was I just want to, a little detour here. That was the most unusual story I've ever told because it was inspired by a nightmare. Um, I had dreamt, I was in Italy and I dreamt that I was playing my violin and there was a baby sitting next to me. And while I played this music, which in my dream is very dark and scary, the baby turned into a monster. And I woke up and I thought, oh my God, what a nightmare. There's a book in here. And that book turned into a book about the Italian Holocaust. Because where did this music come from? Oh, it's a haunted piece of music, and who composed it? And in the middle of writing that story, I was describing this fictional piece of music. And one morning I woke up from another dream and the music was in my head. So I almost feel like I didn't really compose that. It was my subconscious that came up with that melody, and it was recorded by a wonderful violinist. So if you read Playing with Fire, and you're wondering what this music incendio sounds like, you can go to YouTube and hear her play it.
She took a long time to write the comment, so I'll read this to you briefly. Lucy says, a big thank you for appearing in the Lincolnville, Maine at my sister's shop Beyond the Seas many years ago. You were so gracious. We could not believe you were there. I still watch Rizzoli and Isles to this day. And Lucy wants to know, do you still attend book fairs?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it depends on when I get invited. Like I'm going to Long Island. I'm going to East Hampton this weekend to go to a writers' festival, and it just kind of depends on my calendar.
Jerry asks, do you have any say who the readers are for your Audible books? Just finished listening to Spy Coast, and the reader was terrific.
Yeah, when my publisher goes to audio, is about to record an audio, they send me voice samples of actors and say, which one do you think sounds like your character? So I do get to choose based on samples.
Susan, oh, this was in response to the Charles Manson question. Susan recently watched a documentary. There was a doctor from San Francisco who supposedly used mind control on him. There was also maybe some prostitutes involved. So your talk made me remember that, says Susan.
Oh, well, I wouldn't be too surprised if because it was a pretty big program.
All right, let's see here. Stephanie asks, do you visualize the scenes as you write them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think all writers do. I think all of us, because we've all watched television, when we write a scene, we're just kind of imagining, what the setting is. I think what I'm more interested in sometimes is just what are people feeling, or what are, and that to me is the essence of suspense. It's not, as I mentioned, the action. It's the sense that something is about to happen or something is about to go wrong, and that's where we feel that's where we feel the tension in a story.
I had asked you earlier if you might write on a different genre, and you think you're all set at this point in your career. But an anonymous attendee asks, any thoughts on writing a middle grade novel like Nancy Drew?
No, I haven't. Although, and let me just maybe 20 years ago, I had this idea of a young adult, I would say middle grade story about a future when scientists are being hunted down and put into concentration camps, and science is dead because um, they don't want us they don't want us to be scientifically literate. And I thought, oh no, nobody will ever believe a time will come like that. And here we are. And here we are. It's like, oh my God, science is being destroyed. CDC is being dismantled, and all these scientists and NIH are being fired. And I realized I should have written that book 20 years ago, even though nobody would have believed it back then.
I hear you. I hear you. So Sharon asks, I think at one point during our conversation, you referenced a cute bookstore in Camden, Maine. What is the name of that store?
There was a store called Owl and Turtle, which was cute. There's another store up in Belfast, Maine, which is right up the coast called Left Bank Books. And in fact, that's where I've been doing some of my events lately. So we have, Maine is an interesting place. We have a lot of bookstores. Not too many big chains, but a lot of independent bookstores. I've also heard that Maine has one of the highest concentrations of writers per capita than any state in the country. So it's a very literate and artistic place to live.
Anne asks, I can always tell how good a book will be by the characters coming to life to me. I know how their voice sounds, okay, just as you have when writing. So the question is, do you feel that audiobooks distract from that experience?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I prefer to reprint
Yeah.
because I want to hear the voices myself.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with when books get turned into TV shows or books turned into movies. Very often the character that shows up on your screen is not the one you imagine, and it can be very jarring. So I would always go back to the original material.
You told us your origin story, but you didn't quite tell us the why. So Allison asks, what was the spark for the first book you wrote? You made a big career change from medicine to writing. What sparked that first book?
That first book, probably because I was I was reading a lot of romantic suspense back then, and oh, I remember what it was. I was watching a television movie about a woman whose husband gets killed on a plane crash, and she realizes that he had a secret life, so she goes in search of his past. And the whole show just fell apart. It was like there was nothing to it. I thought, I'm going to use that core story of a woman searching for her husband's secret past after he dies. And that became my very first novel called Call After Midnight. It was published by Harlequin Intrigue. Um, and I loved writing that book. I think that that whole idea of tunneling into the past of a spouse whose history is completely unknown to you, and then at the end, of course, there's a surprise in the book, and that he's still alive, but they go their separate ways. Anyway, that was probably the spark. Was a bad television movie.
We've got a question here. Is there a character you wish you had created? I'm not sure if that's is specific to the Martini Club series or just in general. In any of your writing, is there a
Oh,
character you wish you could have created that you haven't?
Harry Potter.
Very good.
Yes, I think we all wish we'd created Harry Potter or Hermione at least.
Hey, well, hey, Tess, you still sold 40 million books, so that's you're doing okay. So, folks, if any of you want to have any more comments or questions, now's the time. But we're going to start to wind things down. So, Tess, what is next for you? It does sound like you're finishing that third book in the series. Anything else you can reveal to us? What's happening in your world right now?
What's happening in my world is I'm just waiting for to hear if there's a green light for the television series. And I have sold another pilot television program to NBC.
Oh,
Completely, it's not a novel. It's an original script. Again, about Maine. I just think that it's time. I love watching what I call comfort crime on television. Mystery series that are not too upsetting, that are not too edgy, that make us feel like the world has not, completely fallen apart. And so, I th that's why I think that this new television series that I have pitched and they bought, called Vacation Land, will find an audience, especially among those of us who are a little older.
excellent. I just started watching Matlock recently, the
Yeah.
CBS version with Kathy Bates, and it kind of reminds me a bit of what you're talking about. We're in a strong, older female protagonist who is often underestimated. I see some parallels between her and the Martini Club a bit. So lots of positive comments in the chat. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them given time constraints. Tess, if people want to learn more about you, do you have a website, social media, newsletter? How can people find out more about your future works?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Blue Sky, and I have a website, tessgerritsen.com.
Now, Tess, usually I'm the behind the scenes tech guy, not usually the public facing interviewer. I know last time you spoke to the library, we had arranged Gary Braver, a fellow author. So you were stuck with me tonight. So was there any questions I should have asked, or any topics we didn't quite cover? Anything you want to add that we didn't get to in the 60 minutes?
No, I think you covered it very well. All I can say is, as writers, the best we can do is just be faithful to our characters and hope you connect with them too.
All right. So, folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Tess for a wonderful conversation. She answered nearly 15 audience questions. We've gotten probably about 50 positive comments there. So we'll wrap things up here. For those watching live, look for an email from me later tonight with a link to the recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. I will also include a link to Wellesley Books to purchase a copy of The Summer Guests. Someone I neglected to thank at the beginning is Megan Beatty. I want to thank her for helping arrange tonight's talk as well. And for those watching live, also, please make sure to take the feedback survey when you exit. So thank you all so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Thanks again, Tess.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.